Welcome to my Neptune live stream class series. So just the way that I worked with the Pluto series, I'm going to devote this first class to introducing the meaning of Neptune aspects. And then we'll be going through all of the aspects to Neptune every single week. So to start, it's going to be helpful, and this is actually nice because our last Pluto class involved Pluto-Neptune aspects, which is a very good transition to this particular series. It's going to be helpful to really spend a little bit of time grounding ourselves in what Neptune really is about, what it points to. And then I'll speak to the meaning of aspects to Neptune. We can think of Neptune as corresponding to reality, to what is. And when we speak about reality, we create a contrast between what is essentially true, which we can acknowledge is totally beyond anything we can comprehend, right? Like what's actually fundamentally real and true, eternally so, isn't a philosophy. It's not a belief system. It's like whatever this is, like whatever reality is, the nature of what is. This is what I'm speaking to. Thus, there's a contrast between the isness, life, reality, existence, and all of our ideas and projections and illusions of it. It's very helpful to understand that Neptune corresponds to ultimate meaning. And when I speak about ultimate meaning, again, it's not some sort of abstract or lofty idea. Ultimate meaning meaning what is real. Like think about the phrase meaning. Meaning is that which gives some sort, I'm trying to find a way of defining meaning without using the word meaning. Meaning is that which gives life or experience substantive quality that says we can trust this. Like the vibration of meaningful is almost hard to define with words because really only what's true is meaningful. Right? If we identify something that's meaningless, what are we going to say? Oh, it's not important, right? We're not going to give it a lot of value. We're not going to trust it. We're not going to give it a lot of attention. Whatever we identify as being meaningful, we're innately, immediately going to give it a lot of our attention, a lot of our devotion, a lot of our interest. And a word vibration that resonates very much with the idea of meaningful is trust. Devotion, faith. Whatever we believe to be real is what we're going to give our absolute trust to. I've often given this analogy. If I'm going to do a free fall and you say you're going to catch me, it means I have total trust that you're going to catch me. So when we speak about this idea of ultimate meaning, it really points to the fact that we are each giving meaning to reality in a certain way that enables us to trust it, right? If there's an absence of trust, which means we can't really find any kind of meaning, then internally there's a deep sense of emptiness, and this could be a sort of nihilistic state where everything's just sort of empty and void of meaning. When something's void of meaning, we have no will to live. We have no connection to it. It's meaning itself that says, okay, there's purpose behind my life. Like there's something greater here that is essential and I can trust in it. Okay? So ultimate meaning being a very important concept when we think about Neptune. Thus, where we might place our projection or our illusion of meaning is a really important thing to understand with Neptune. We're going to find ourselves temporarily at different times seeking to make a connection with meaningfulness, with something that we can totally trust because of that underlying need to know that we can trust life, that life is meaningful. We all have that need because life is meaningful. It's kind of like the fish in the water has a deep drive within them to trust that they're in something that is good for them because they are. Like the water is the whole environment within which they live. but it's so encompassing that it can't be grasped. So there's this search, what's the point of life? What's this all about? So we can project all kinds of ideas that will replace the meaning that we're not in touch with. We're not in touch with the water within which we are swimming. If we're not in touch with this meaning that is, we got to do something about that, right? So in the extreme, as I mentioned, there can be that there's no fuel to live. Then we can have that Neptune kind of experience where just like there's no point in anything. And we all get there at a certain point. And we usually get there when that which we've given meaning has led us to the point of disillusionment. And the disillusionment is simply we've replaced, and you can say like God, truth, love, reality with something else that we're saying, this is where I can give my full devotion and trust. And what's interesting about Neptune is the truth is everything and everywhere, but it's not one thing or one place. So it's a little bit tricky in that way. We can give ultimate meaning to a relationship or to, a certain way of looking, right? Or accomplishing something in life. From a Neptunian point of view, that would be, this is a sand castle that we've built, and it corresponds to the reality that I think is meaningful, that I can completely trust, that I can surrender to completely. Like there's an existential sense of peace and trust and satisfaction with life because of the conditions that currently exist. So they, said something nice to me, right? I feel so good about that. And like suddenly like life is good again. The flowers are blooming. It's a sunny day every day, and nothing bothers me because I have this love or this affection from this person. Like, they forgot my name. They don't even know my name. What? I thought they saw me as this divine being. Or this physical condition that I was feeling so good about, something happened and now that's gone. Suddenly, the perfection of one's life can just fall away like waters washing away a sandcastle. That loss of perfection, and the mind won't frame it necessarily as a perfection. And I'm not speaking about perfectionism. I'm speaking about that place, that state of being where everything is fundamentally okay, right? Problems don't bother us. The mosquito isn't an issue because we are in love. It can be a snap of a finger that illusion of ultimate meaning just dissolves. And what's difficult about that disillusionment is we don't necessarily know where to redirect our trust because meaning has just been lost. And if we've lost meaning in what we've otherwise determined to be ultimately meaningful, there's like this vacuum. We don't know what to trust. And this can be a very important quality within Neptune because in that disillusionment process, it can really lead us along this path of what's real. Like I really invested. It can be in a teacher, in a spiritual idea, any belief system or anything that we're giving value can become the point of giving ultimate meaning. And by the way, to qualify the difference, belief relative to Neptune is what we are, it's an emotional investment of trust and meaning, which is different than a belief system of Jupiter, which is a philosophical cosmological framework, right? You can combine the two, right? You can give ultimate meaning to a belief system, and that becomes your underlying emotional basis for living and trusting in life in the first place. But innately, beliefs when it comes to Neptune corresponds to that which we're giving our total trust, not philosophically or mentally. You don't need any kind of cosmological stuff going on. There's no intellect here. It's a free fall trust. It literally says this is what makes life. Neptune's a higher octave of Venus, so you think of Venus as like how we enjoy our life and make it livable and essentially accommodating. Neptune as a higher octave is like what makes the existential fact of our human existence valuable in the first place. So on that journey of disillusionment, it can really lead to a sense of I don't know who or what or where to trust. And this can be a very difficult experience where maybe there was a lot of openness and trust, right? And this can express with Neptune as I'm going to be a good and kind person, trust people, see the best in people, give easily, give freely, and then I'm being duped. I'm being taken advantage of. What this is really all pointing back to are these mistakes in our thinking. There's a certain point where we began to believe that life was the way that we were dictating it should be. So I'm a good person and life is going to treat me nicely. It's a little bit of a spiritual confusion. Absolute unconditional trust in life here is being interrupted with a condition that says, and it's going to look this way. No different than getting into a relationship, a Neptunian relationship, let's say, and expecting that the other person's going to behave and treat you a certain way. Well, who said they would? That's coming from you. And so we have all these illusory ideas that are unchecked happening with Neptune. And when life simply is not what we said it would be, we can feel really distrustful. And this really will often happen by way of, being taken advantage of, being deceived, being the last, right? Being the weak and the small and the last one, where I'm just not getting to where I thought I should be. Life isn't treating me or meeting me in the way that I thought. An important thing to understand with Neptune is where we can really fall into the issue of misapplying spiritual understanding or spiritual principle, right? We can have this trust and this love and this inner knowing and devotion to love, to God, to reality, to the moment, where within all of us we know that what's true is right here, but we can easily misapply that or misdirect it by associating a condition that we're inventing along with it. So a metaphor that I often give to this is sort of the ignorance of a child relating to their parents and determining the conditions from which the parents must give to them, right? The child doesn't have a broad enough understanding of reality, right? So it wouldn't necessarily work for the child to say, parents, I want you to manifest a treehouse. It doesn't work that way. You actually got to get in a car and buy the wood, but demanding, I want it right now. It just can't happen that way. And so there can be a disillusion. I prayed for a treehouse and it didn't manifest. What's up with that? And that is different than a trust in the parents. I want a treehouse. If that's a sincere prayer, it's there. But it's not being conflicted with all these other arbitrary conditions. And so then the requesting itself actually gets to be a following and a listening. What is the path that I can't understand, that I can't invent, that I can't affirm and assert towards this treehouse? The oneness, which knows more than we do, that grasps more of full reality than we do, understands all of the people, places, things, pieces, and elements of itself. And so to give ourselves to trust says fundamentally, and this is a core teaching of Neptune, every desire, every question, every request, every problem that we have, we can say, this is yours. I don't know how to solve this because my thinking is limited. If I leave this only to myself, I'm going to get myself confused, and fundamentally, I'm going to end up in disappointment. Because when we try to do it ourselves, according to our illusory understanding of who we are and what this world is, we might at times find ourselves, oh, it feels good, I got something, right? But that's going to quickly go as quickly as it came. We're depending on a limited and false illusory understanding of reality. So it's always going to lead towards disappointment. The reorientation towards co-creatorship means I'm in a relationship consciously with that which is both inside of me, it is the essence of what I am, and it's all that is. It's inside of me and it's greater than me. And having a conscious relationship to this means everything that I don't understand in life, every problem that I identify, is solved from the point of view of that which is uncomplicated. From the point of view of that which is not lacking in anything, from the point of view of that which is not conflicted from within itself, everything can be brought to that reference point. This is like one of the big principles in A Course in Miracles, which I imagine I'll reference a lot in this series because we're doing Neptune. There are two course lessons that I really love, which is, let me recognize my problems so that they may be solved, and let me recognize that my problems have been solved. In a sense, recognizing and identifying a problem is like the first step in being able to, in virtue of recognizing it, letting go of seeking to control the solution, resigning as our own self-appointed problem solver for everything that happens. So this orientation of trusting in reality really means two things. It means being able to consciously identify that we are not the ones that invented ourselves. We are not the ones that invented whatever this is. And thus we can too let go of adding any conditions to the resolution that we're seeking in any part of our life. And this is where we really learn what unconditional love is. So I gave and I gave and I loved, and now you're treating me this way, or life is treating me this way. Well, that's not unconditional. So we learn, what is it like to be able to give, to be able to trust, and to give ourselves fully without being hurt, right? Like without being disillusioned or needing or expecting something from the outside. In a sense, isn't that something we all want? We all want to be at a place within ourselves where we know that we're safe to give fully, to give freely, to give unconditionally. But I think this gets very confusing when we have all kinds of entangled ideas of what is supposed to happen to us, what we're supposed to get back in return as a result of our giving. You know, just to appreciate, I'm going to probably do this a couple of times during this talk, but just look at Pisces here in the 12th, right? The natural inconjunct between Libra and the 12th house. That inconjunct really speaks strongly to all the ways in which we can kind of get confused in our own relationships, either displacing ultimate meaning into our relationships, or where we get confused between the levels of, there are the Libra relational experiences, which require consent and mutuality. What are you agreeing to? What am I agreeing to, right? But that's different. Like that mutuality of exchange and conscious relationship is different than the unconditional love of Pisces, which is just being in a state of love. And in Pisces, when we're in that state of love, it's in A Course in Miracles is what's defined as the idea of purpose is referred to in two different ways. From one perspective, our purpose is to forgive, right? To let go of our own grievances and learn to see through a forgiven, loving, healed mind, seeing the world beyond the boxes that we've put on it. So we forgive. But then there's a more specific expression of purpose, which is special function or special purpose, which is another way of saying that each one of us, according to our design in nature, have a natural function and role to play as a part of the oneness, as a part of the plan of the oneness returning to itself. That's Neptune. This unique function and role that we each play as a part of the return and the remembering of all of oneness to itself says that when we are playing and performing that function, we're sourcing ourselves from the source. We're part of the flow and the plan, so to speak, of the oneness, of love. And so when we're in touch with that, there is actually an infinite amount of energy. and we can perform and we can give, and we're not looking for something back because we're doing our part. And when we play our role, we really return our knowledge of self back to who we truly are. And in the same sense, because the nature of what we are is not in separation, we give that to others as well. So it's an important thing to understand just where expectations and confusions around the unconditionality of giving comes in with Pisces is because when we're really learning about love and what it's like to give unconditionally, it's not associated with any idea of sacrifice where I'm going to lose something by giving. When I lose something through giving, I'm going to need or expect that I'm going to get something back. The Pisces giving is replenishing to oneself and to others. And that's what a miracle is too. The miracle is the plugging oneself to that current of love and unity, and in a sense, choosing to transcend the world of illusions or the perceptions of illusion, the grievances, the problems, the separations, kind of moving beyond that and relating to the world, relating to others from that healed mind where we can act and see and give from that place of love. And there's healing that happens there in that place. So coming back to just the idea of disillusionment, because I want to offer a couple more points and then I'll move into the aspects. When disillusionment occurs, it can easily lead to a state of victimization. And the victimization is the result of having conditionally trusted in something that isn't real, but in a sense blaming God for it. And blaming however we want to direct that, reality or another person. And really no one's to blame but ourselves. And this is where it's a really important thing to understand, because there is a sense of innocence within Neptune, right? Like being a good person, but bad things happen to me. And there can be a sort of hopelessness or helplessness within the Neptune archetype. And this helplessness is, either I'm waiting for someone to save me, or I'm waiting for something to change in the future. I'm waiting for my conditions to shift. Or I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm entreating to God, help me with this problem. And in these states of mind, we're basically expecting, the phrase expectation is a really important one if we can identify where expectations kind of come up, because expectations have nothing to do with reality. Really, if you think about the idea of expectation, it's like standing in the present moment and expecting that something's going to happen later. Just the whole framework of it. The correct use of expectations is when you're like practically working on something that has a measured cause and effect, and you could be expecting as a result of an action the effect of that action. But to be in a place of expectation is to be disconnected to one's power and one's attunement to the source, to this greater reality within which we are all a part of. So let me tune back into where I was going with this. So in a state of innocence, we'll fundamentally, if it's not being checked by the disappointment of our expectation, there's a sort of like euphoria in innocence, right? Like everything's great, everything's working out all the time, everything's wonderful. As disappointment sets in or expectations aren't met, there's a disillusionment of that innocence, and it can be very terrifying. Right? The disillusionment of innocence can simply be like really bad things are happening, right? People are treating me a certain way. Bad things are happening in the world. And so a big teaching in Neptune is we are responsible for where we are displacing meaning. And it's not like you've done something wrong or you're a bad person. Like we can't, like the mind wants to make some kind of equivalence. Like, I must have done something wrong to be suffering this, right? It's just working out all of these illusory thoughts, these confusions. Sometimes the deepest teaching that emerges through suffering, through experiencing difficulties or our innocence being illusioned is where ultimately we have the opportunity to realize the world that we see and all the things that we thought were real are not. They are not meaningful. And it brings us back inside to consciously cultivate a relationship with what is ultimately meaningful. As we cultivate a relationship with what is ultimately meaningful, it infuses our life with purpose and direction. But we're operating on a level where we're not necessarily kind of, again, like the higher octave of Venus. There's this teaching in the Venus Libra archetype of sometimes Jeff Green says like the supreme act of giving is appearing not to give sometimes, right? It's not about meeting every person's need. It's not about indiscriminately saying yes to everything, because there needs to be a spiritual discernment, right? In a confused state, it's, well, I'm here to give, so I'm going to give everything to everyone all the time and have no boundaries. But boundaries are absolutely necessary as long as we are living in time and space and have bodies. The key with Neptune is to really learn how to discern the proper use of time and space and boundaries with respect to that which is beyond all of that. Otherwise, it easily becomes an issue of martyrdom or sacrifice. Like we're literally just giving ourselves away with some sort of idea that we're supposed to. Or that's what the spiritual thing is. But we'll notice we might not feel good about it. We might feel empty. We may not feel that we're actually in a place of unity and connection. So being able to have spiritual discernment speaks to a very important Neptune quality, which is a neutrality. Neutrality, in a sense, says we can see the world and we're not going to lose our alignment, lose our connection because we're seeing the suffering that is happening in the world. We don't have to go out and actively feed every single person or save every single person or give hours and hours to every person that needs our ear. Some of the most awakened beings, when I witness them, I'm thinking of Amritananda Maima Amma, the hugging saint. She'll be in front of thousands of people, and she just sits in this repose, in this quiet, in this stillness. And she'll teach. And then people come up and she'll give hugs. That's her blessing. That's her, transmission to them. But what she's not doing is like meeting every single person on the level of their illusion. Because every single person on the level of their illusion, relative to the problems that we think we have, we tend to look towards that place of salvation from the point of view of our confusion. Here are my problems, and I'm upset, and I'm out of my alignment and my spiritual connection, and this is distressing me, and please help me with that. The answer isn't going to meet us in our distress, right? Because the answer is a different framework. It's a different reference point. We can bestow this miracle of love to another by actually seeing their healed self, seeing their healed reality, and refusing to join them on the level of their illusion. But that might mean we're not going to give them what they really think they need. And do you understand the difference between that? Like, what's amazing about reality is it never goes out of its way and leaves itself to meet us in our confusion. It can't. Now, just thinking of it in those terms, of course it can't. Right? Life is never going to violate itself to meet us where we are wrong. It's always going to be what it is. Truth is always going to be true. And so it's our vibration of despair and confusion itself. We can give healing to one another, but not by validating the confusion, the distress, the fear. But in fact, by consciously choosing to deny it. That's like from a Neptune point of view, denial is a very important thing. Denial here, and if I forget to come back to denial, remind me. But denial here, the correct use of denial is denying the untrue, and thus giving our full attention to the truth. And so, coming back to the teaching of Amma, she's not like trying to solve everyone's problems. She's transmitting from a higher place. And this is where we're all learning to purify our consciousness, to purify ourselves. Neptune corresponding to consciousness, and the term Jeff Green often used with Neptune is it's how we spiritualize our life. As we spiritualize our life, we purify our vision. And we learn to do the work to become the instrument that connects us to the truth, to the oneness that acts through us, with us, as us, that serves all beings. As we purify, our actions flow more and more indiscriminately according to the will of love, right? So water will move wherever it's available to be received. It'll keep on flowing to the lowest of places, right? That's the nature of love. That's the nature of our purpose from a Neptune point of view. We're always going to find that our actions, that our presence, our work will move to all the places, the lowest of the lowest crevices, any little opening. Doesn't matter where it is in time and space, will receive of this love. And think of also how water works. Like, it fills the lowest places first, and then it rises and rises and rises, right? So it becomes this progressively forgiven and healed reality. And so when you think of Neptune, you can think of like the teachings of Jesus, right? Like, those who have, I don't know the quote, but it's like, those who give to me are those who've given to those in the greatest of need, right? How we treat those in the greatest need, of greatest vulnerability and greatest suffering, it's that state of compassion and recognition of I'm no better than, or higher than, or lesser than anyone, and that Neptune will flow. So ideas of reaching the masses, where we do works that are indiscriminate of any kind of division or separation of race, gender, of anything, right? Now again, that can easily get confused with these underlying Neptunian teachings around discrimination and discernment. We have to remember that it's not our job to save everyone according to our thinking. It's our job to be the love that we are and to correct our own illusions and our own mistakes. The moment we think, I am helping someone who is in a state of suffering to get out of their suffering, we have to be careful, because it's very easy in that moment to actually bring our energy down and to be in a place where we're trying to take people out of their suffering instead of seeing them as healed. Like, the difference between the two, it's very subtle. We can relate to them, right? But to see them as healed, the moment anything becomes effortful, the moment we have to like do something, it's a project, it's a task, right? The moment anything becomes a doing is where we begin to lose energy, because there's a lot of separation in doing. There's object and subject focus. The teaching with Neptune is sort of a non-doing doer. Like, that's like the Wu Wei principle. You're doing, but it doesn't seem like you're doing, because the doing itself is sort of being done through you, as opposed to the effortful, egoic, I'm doing something. So this is the purification process that happened with Neptune. I was listening to a podcast from one of the Course in Miracles podcasts, Circle of Atonement, which is a beautiful, a couple people there that do this beautiful teaching. And they're sharing this idea that from the point of view of the Course, there's this like idea that the pull of God, the pull of love, is irresistible. It's the strongest pull there is. And just contrasting how it's interesting, because we might find ourselves like looking for it, right? Trying to make a connection. But the pull of God, the pull of truth, and the pull of the soul of our being towards it, it's like the strongest force there is. And the only issue is we have all kinds of other things getting in the way that seem to make it hard. All kinds of other desires, all kinds of other illusions. And so we're operating where the seemingly strongest, most impelling force that exists is obscured, because we're holding on to so many things on the inside. And that really, speaks again to the Pluto-Neptune relationship. Pluto is bottom line because fundamentally we don't connect with this Neptunian reality in an abiding way beyond the degree to which we've exhausted our desires for something else. This is where the teaching that Neptune is ultimate reality And Pluto is the evolutionary journey itself of the soul reawakening to its oneness with ultimate reality, with oneness. So we can do this Neptune work and the spiritualization process, and we cultivate and purify ourselves along the evolutionary journey. That's an important framework to understand when really understanding these teachings from an evolutionary astrology perspective. That to me is really where the gem and the beauty of this work is. Understanding everything from the point of view of the soul's ongoing evolutionary journey. To give an example, you can take a psychedelic medicine and have like a really deep unity experience and kind of like feel this light and this forgiveness and deep inspiration. But that's not going to be integrated on a day-to-day basis in your own personal life. You're still going to have to deal with the soul content that needs to be addressed. And that's actually where healing or awakening kind of has these two different components to it, I'm finding. Right? There's like the transcendent element, which is a really powerful and important part of it. But we don't actually integrate that completely in our human life if we're not dealing with sort of the lower dimensions as well, the shadow work, right? The unresolved desires, the things that we're holding on to on the inside. And that's why it's easy to, with Neptune, we can easily bypass all of the complexity. We can escape. Here's that other use of denial. We can escape the world and all of the problems, but in the way of bypassing. And that's different than sort of doing the evolutionary work of meeting the soul content and actually working through it. And ultimately, from a Neptunian point of view, everything that kind of arises from a Neptunian point of view is where the next miracle has yet to happen, right? It's like it's where the next perceptual shift has yet to occur. It's where forgiveness and love is yet to emerge. Any suffering, any grievance, it's all pointing to our fundamental confusion. And this is what emerges as we do that greater Plutonian evolutionary work. We have to meet the shadow content. We have to work with it. We have to embrace the soul curriculum and work through our desires. So this use of denial here is kind of putting one's head in the sand, or maybe putting one's head in the clouds more accurately, and not looking at the problems, which is different than meeting the problems authentically and honestly and surrendering them over. So it's an important thing to understand that the Neptunian work isn't all of the work. I think as a spiritual society kind of emerging in the world, we're starting to understand that, because spiritual cosmologies, for the most part, for the majority of past several hundred years or so, haven't really attended to or addressed the shadow realm very much. Right? What to do with unresolved desire. It'll teach techniques for transmuting things, right? But it didn't really address, like, how do you really work with this and integrate this on the human relational realm in this world, like without like leaving to a monastery, right? It's like we haven't really known how to integrate our spirituality in the world. So it's an important thing to understand with Neptune. And that's where like drugs, psychedelic experiences, spiritual experiences in general, likewise, anything that makes you feel like everything's okay. Anything can become a point of addiction, and thus a way of avoiding actually facing the curriculum and the content of your soul work. Usually we'll also find immense issues around boundaries when you have a situation like that. Where there's a sort of spiritual bypassing, there's also going to be a tendency to not tend to inconsistencies or incongruencies with one's boundaries. So it can be easy to sort of dissociate and do things that are harmful for oneself and enable things that aren't good, but to sort of like, well, it's all forgiven, and not really deal with it. So doing this work of forgiveness and healing and unconditional love with Neptune really means engaging and fully meet. There's this quote associated to Rumi, but it's also associated to A Course in Miracles. It's in both, maybe. Who knows where it came from? Like, your job is not to seek love, but to find and remove all the obstacles to its awareness, something like that. I'm not a good quote. If you want to type in the comments, if you know it, please feel free to do so. Right? Like love is what's there. That's what's original. That's what's essential. Everything else comes and goes. And so on this journey of returning and restoring our connection to love, it's letting all of the illusions, everything else arise first. And otherwise, we find ourselves making the mistake of looking for God, right? Like looking for meaning. And it's like you can't look for it because it's always right here. It's always what's there. And so the devotional practice of Neptune is the faith in that being so. And thus, when there's a problem, we tell ourselves, okay, well, here's the problem, but I must not understand it because what's true is right here, right now, and truth isn't conflicted. It's a really powerful experience. Now, everyone's going to have their own cosmological orientation from a Sag point of view, right? So when we think of Neptune, just to be really clear, we're not like, you can use any of these words. Now, present moment, reality, meaning, love, truth, God, source. And in a sense, they're all just different ways of talking about that thing that you can't talk about because it's just right here, right now. And it's so pervading, and its teaching is always right now. Like the teaching of it is always towards it. Okay, enough on that. Let me see on my notes if there are other pieces that I want to speak to, and then I'll introduce how I'm going to be approaching working with Neptune in aspects. Okay, good. So yeah, let's tune into this. Planets in aspect to Neptune are going to correspond to how we're going to be spiritualizing our life and reascribing and reorienting ourselves to ultimate meaning through the lens of that particular planetary function and its aspect to Neptune. In general, as I've said with Pluto, don't make too much of a distinction as of yet in your mind between hard aspects and easy aspects. You could have, a trine between Neptune and Venus. And yes, that can mean a lot of beauty and inspiration and harmony. I mean, this is relative to function. There can be a sense of harmony and grace and beauty that one's infused with. And the ability to love others and to see the divine in others. And it can be very easy to experience a more euphoric, beautiful quality of experience in life. But it doesn't mean you're not going to become confused or disillusioned. In fact, the trine itself might say it'll be easier to invest a lot of meaning in that which is meaningless because it's so beautiful and attractive and it draws you and it really feels good. And so with the trines or the sextiles and the easier aspects, there needs to be an active spiritual discernment to discern between the real and the unreal. With the harder aspects, which includes conjunction, in general, there's going to be a little bit more of the stress around the disillusionment process. I mean, facing these moments of loss of meaning, reorienting towards where do I put my faith, where do I put my devotion, where do I put my trust. And in general, for all Neptune aspects, this is where we're going to be learning lessons around spiritual discernment, discrimination, right use of boundaries, cultivating assertive neutrality, realizing the futility of our own expectations. There is a time in my life where I sort of had this internal realization that I was never going to understand all of astrology. I'll probably repeat this again when I talk about Mercury and Neptune. And it was very disillusioning, in fact. I really felt disheartened. And it was an important period for me where I actually had to come to some sort of realization that, yeah, I'm never going to, my mind's never going to be able to logically piece it all together. There's too much. It's infinite. And so the realization was it's more about using my mind in service. Like it's more about me learning to make my mind an instrument for something of healing value and service in the world. And thus, it's not about knowing everything, because Neptune says the moment you try to possess it, it's going to slip out of your fingers. But the moment you let go and you really focus on unifying yourself with God's will, that's when you become an instrument. And everything, in theory, can come in. Like, there's no limit there. It's an interesting thing with Neptune. Like, there's no limit. But if you're trying to get it all, or grasp everything, or be universal, according to your idea of it, you're going to be possessing something that can't be possessed. Like, all that is needs to be left to be what it is. And as we grow, we become greater and greater instruments, but it's always in the present moment. And you can't, like, possess it and make it this thing that you want to make it. So working with Neptune aspects always are these ways of bringing us back into the present moment, bringing us back into our inseparable relationship with greater meaning and greater truth, where there and only there everything makes sense again. And the disillusionment process of having associated meaning where it isn't. Now, another thing is, this is also where you can find your soul becoming an instrument for something that reaches the masses. So, things like becoming famous, becoming an icon for many, many people, right? Becoming an icon for something that represents something spiritual or inspiring to the masses. Because of that principle of water flowing to all the places, one can become an instrument that serves a purpose greater than oneself. And this is where I should probably speak to an important facet of Neptune that Jeff Green beautifully spoke to, which is hiding. Hiding can show up in various ways, but one expression of hiding is everyone needs something from me. And so I need to hide myself because I feel very vulnerable to all of the attention, right? You could have Neptune Venus. Everyone's like, oh, this person's loving and giving. Neptune Moon. You feel like wherever you are, people are wanting to turn to you to nurture and care for them. Mercury, Neptune, everyone's asking you questions or wants you to share information with them. Mercury, Jupiter, people see you as a guru and you're just right? There's like that infinite generosity of giving and love, right? But this can become confusing, where then easily can move into feeling depleted or overwhelmed by this function or this role. And this becomes a part of the purification process because, again, it points to one's service doesn't always require active participation in time and space experience. It's not about any idea of separation, and thus the way in which we are to each play a role doesn't require necessarily the conditions we might think. Do I need to be in front of a person's body? Do they have to know that I exist? Right? We have some of these awakened beings that spend their entire life on a cave. And this is not better than or less than being involved in the world, but it's a confusion and a mistake to think that necessarily so one has to be actively busy all the time and meeting all of the needs that are being asked, right? So until that spiritual discernment is really established, there might be that sense of feeling need to hide or protect oneself. And in other ways too, it's like you could have Neptune and a person is like a famous musician or an artist, or like someone recorded a TikTok video of them like doing something cool and suddenly they're famous and everyone knows them. That can be overwhelming, where the loss of the personal self, my personal life, my personal privacy can just like blow up overnight. Which is what can really lead towards a state of hiding. The other dimension of hiding is just like a sense of feeling vulnerable. I don't know how to navigate all of the different energetics. Neptune's our immune system, right? So we feel unprotected. I don't know how to navigate all of the needs and the demands of being asked of me in life. So I'm going to try to stay away from it and keep myself hidden, right? Or it's like, I don't know how to deal with all of the suffering. It's too much. I don't know how to deal with the suffering. So I can't see it. I want to avoid it. So again, the teaching here is a sort of neutrality. And then there's like that cultivation of coming into alignment with God's will, which is another way of saying where we are plugged into our deepest joy and inspiration. Like Neptune is inspiration. We don't lose a thing when we're in it. And so any ideas of giving that equals loss or martyrdom is a confusion. The teaching with Neptune is being keyed into our inherent connection to source, and then we play the role that comes from that connection, which is the same thing as being inspired. Okay, Let me see a question here. Would you say Neptune is always present and yet elusive, Ari? Absolutely. Yeah, both, because it's always present, but you can't ever possess it as a defined, measured time-space quantity. I told this story recently. Maybe I even told it in my last Pluto Neptune podcast. I forgot, but live stream. There's a story that I heard Bhagavan tell. Someone went into a temple and saw this monk meditating, and the coconut that this guy was meditating with was like painted as like a deity, and it had a glow to it. And this man asked the meditating person, "Wow, look at that deity. Who is that deity that you're praying to? Tell me, like, how did it get this glow? Who are you?" And he was amazed to see this like physical, like auric glow around this coconut. And the guy meditating picked up the god, the deity, right, and said, "Oh, this is just a coconut," and threw it against the wall and just broke it. I love that story. I love the profanity of it, and I love the sacredness of it. We find God where we give ourselves total devotion to trust in its reality. And it's like you can then also just say it's a coconut. And then in the next moment, take all those fragmented coconut pieces and come back to God again. So everything becomes an instrument. Everything becomes a vessel. And it's like, because it's what's always here, it's all pervading, it just requires our absolute devotion. Let's just like contemplate the beauty of that for a moment. Only something that is always true, that's unconditionally and always real and always true, can be something that we could be lost to and confused about. Right? Because if it was conditionally true, if it was only some things, people, places, experiences, or conditions, then it would make sense if we didn't feel it, because we'd have to create those conditions to feel it. But it's not. It's everything, everywhere. And that's why we can miss it, which is like the beautifully redemptive quality of Neptune, because it invites us to take responsibility, for us to take responsibility, get out of our innocence, get out of our victimization, get out of our like these are the Neptune teachings, and actually reconnect with what's fundamentally true and unconflicted. And just like think about like the greatness of reality itself, how reality is spacious and holds all of it. And when I say all of it, I'm like all of it, like all of the bullshit that happens in this planet, all of the evil and the darkness and the violence, but also like all of it being like all of the planets, all of the galaxies, all like everything is in all of it, right? And it's incomprehensible, but like this all of itness isn't conflicted about all the different ideas that us humans here on Earth have of it. And there's something of that peace that we find in connecting ourselves with that source of meaning that teaches us a way of peace and being unconflicted. So let me see the next question. My experience in complementary medicine was oriented to personal experience because the medical viewpoint ignored the curriculum of one's life. Health was only dealing with physical conditions. Yeah, exactly. Neptune can be brought into any field, any area of life. And we're going to be seeing healing, not as the dealing with the symptoms or the conditions of one's life, but dealing with the root cause of our own confusion and separation. It's like healing is always going to be a return back to the truth, a reconnection with the truth, with oneness. It's a restoration of the state of love, which is our natural state. And then like physical conditions might change along with that. But when we associate healing with the physical conditions, we will get confused. It's a really important principle here. Okay, so let me tune in to see if there are other few things that I want to speak to in introducing aspects in particular. That feels complete. Does anyone have any more questions? Anything else that you want to write in that I can address here before we bring this class to a close? There's a beautiful pamphlet that comes as like an extra pamphlet in A Course in Miracles. It's called The Song of Prayer. And just like the beginning couple sections are just so beautiful. And it speaks about levels of prayer. And I find this really helpful for understanding Neptune. Let me say this before I go into that. This is a fascinating thing. I have my own particular cosmological filter. When we look at Neptune, we don't even have to speak about prayer. You can look at Neptune from a more of a Buddhist point of view and just kind of look at the orientation to Neptune being like the infinite void, like the, I don't have the right terminology for it. But there isn't necessarily within that a construct of prayer, but there is going to be an underlying core trust in it. And that's the piece here. And I'm personally fascinated by kind of the combination of different spiritual cosmologies. With Jupiter and Gemini right now, this is like really alive for me. Working with these different cosmologies, how they all kind of work in their own ways, because Neptune itself, like Pisces Neptune, isn't a cosmology, and there's no right way to look at what is. And because it's everything, you can also you can have a personal relationship to it. Or you can kind of have more of an objective, detached, like it's not personal. It's just, there are all kinds of ways of framing it, and they're all going to be different ways of connecting back to it. And I think it's just really fascinating and beautiful. So in the Song of Prayer, and this is like, in a sense, like oneness is going to conform to the conditions that we've created for it, because it itself doesn't have a condition, which is impossible to comprehend. So however we want to conceive of reality is going to conform to the container that we've created to be in relationship to it, or to conceive of it. And this is, by the way, why it's like, depending on your particular cultural context or religious conditioning, right? Love is always going to meet us where we're ready to receive it. And this is an important thing. Our illusions aren't going to be validated ever, but we're never going to be rejected for our particular filter or conditioning, right? Like our cultural context. So the way in which we are kind of orienting our attention towards reality is internally the kind of container that we've created to be in relationship to it. And that's where God comes in. This is another way of saying God comes in where we create the space for it, and it'll fill that space completely. So as we work with our minds to explore the kind of spaces that we've created, that's simply going to be met 100% one-to-one ratio. But it's a matter of we're the ones that are sort of controlling the space that we're allowing for reality to kind of settle inside of us. It's an important thing to understand. And that's generally why when people have sort of spiritually awakening experiences, or they find themselves awakening at any stage of evolution, they're not necessarily going to be confronted with an experience that is so far beyond what they can comprehend or integrate. A Jewish, religious Jewish person who's having a unity connection with God isn't probably going to have a Jesus experience. If he did, or she did, that would be relevant for their journey for whatever reasons, right? But there's not one way in which the oneness is going to come up and show up for each individual. It's going to show up in the way that is relevant for that person at that time, and that's the point that I'm making. So, coming back to the Song of Prayer, there's one level of prayer that it's called entreating God. It's like asking for help. And as a soul kind of walks up that ladder, it becomes less about asking for something and more about asking to receive what has already been given, which is the point of Neptune. It's not something in the future. It's not something that I'm needing to do to save me. It's the truth that I already am saved. It's the truth that God is already here, that the answer is already worked out. The problem's already solved. And so there's sort of like this gratitude and devotion and an approaching consummation in the prayer itself, in not so much asking for a thing, but more so in asking, but that asking not even being an asking as much as like a bringing our attention into a gratitude for the truth or the fact of it already being resolved. Right? It's like prayer is kind of like hard to really pinpoint in the sense of the deepest quality of it, I think, is moving more and more and more towards this state of knowing. It's like approaching that. And I think it's just so beautiful. Okay, so a couple more questions here. Okay, great. Thank you all for joining me. I look very forward to continuing with this series, and we will join next week for our first class on Neptune Moon. Reminder, I am available for personal sessions, one-on-one, relationship, long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. I have a classes page with an entire training program. Currently, it's available as a self-study, and you can always jump in for any future live cohorts. And I have a newsletter. If you'd like to get on my newsletter and receive articles and teachings that I often create in tandem to my videos, you can sign up as well. I'm going to put all of that in the description below. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.